Good morning. This past weekend, I went to the grocery store to buy some Kalamata olives. My husband and I were going to make homemade pizza that weekend, and I needed Kalamata olives and a few other things. And as I walked into the grocery store, my cell phone rang, and it was my sister who wanted to talk about my niece's wedding, which, by the way, is next week. So I ended up, and you guys may have had this experience, I ended up doing my little trip through the grocery store while talking on my cell phone. And I was a very distracted buyer as a result. And I made it through the grocery store, got home, opened up the bags, and when I looked in there, you can probably guess what happened. There were no Kalamata olives in the bags. I remember standing in front of the olives. I thought I remembered reaching for a jar and buying it, but apparently I didn't. I did, however, end up with an eggplant and crystallized ginger, which I have no idea why I bought them, and they were in the bag, and they're still sitting in my house. I want to talk today about what happens in the brain when we are buying, and not necessarily just when you're in a grocery store buying. I am a behavioral psychologist and behavioral scientist. I have a PhD in psychology, and I study and write and consult about how people decide and why they decide what they decide. And we're going to narrow that in even further for this morning, because I really want to talk just about the brain science that has to do with people making a buying decision when they take that action to purchase, and that's what we're going to cover today. So I have 5 things for you, 5 kind of collections of brain science research that I want to share. So the first one is that people buy when they feel confident about the decision to buy. And so I've italicized the words feel confident because there's 2 really important things there. One is feel and one is being confident. It's not that they necessarily are actually confident, that they have necessarily done a lot of research, but they feel like they are ready to make this decision. They feel like they have enough information to make the decision. And so there's several research studies, this is one of them, that I mentioned here about the fact that when people feel confident, that's when they will take that action. This is primarily an unconscious process, and what we know about buying decisions, and I'll come back to this because it's just true and you've probably heard it before, is that almost all of this is unconscious. So it's an unconscious process, and it actually, the research for instance, by these people has shown that it comes down to a single neuron firing in the brain. Research scientists have actually been able to measure that when a particular decision is being made, there is one neuron, and when that one neuron fires, then they take the action to buy. And I can tell you that you are not consciously aware of an individual neuron firing. So that's why we know this is an unconscious matter. So when people feel confident, then they will take that action. So the only thing that really matters if you're trying to get someone to buy something is that you get them to that confidence point. Now, how do you do that? Yeah, of course, it depends. It depends on them, it depends on the product, it depends on the service. Sometimes it means they have a go-to person. You know, there are people who make decisions about buying huge purchases, expensive items, computers or cars, and really what's influencing them is their friend or brother who says, oh yeah, absolutely buy that one. and just that's all they needed to hear, right? Whether they did any research before or after, all they needed to hear was that one go-to person saying buy that one. And that was the trigger for them that made them feel confident. For other people, they may need lots of data and lots of data. But you, if you're the one that's trying to get them to buy, have to do the research so you know, for this particular target audience, buying this particular product or service, this is what makes them feel confident, and really focus on that. That was number 1. Number 2, dopamine is released when people anticipate, not when they get the reward. So some of you may know about dopamine. It's a brain chemical that does so much stuff, actually not just in your brain, it actually works throughout your body. But we'll kind of narrow down and focus on the idea that is kind of commonly talked about, that dopamine is released when people get a reward. It's the feel-good chemical. And actually there's a lot of research that shows that's not exactly true. Dopamine makes you seek information, and dopamine also is released mainly when you anticipate a reward. So there's some research by Robert Sapolsky at Stanford that I really like, and here's what he did. He took a rat, put it in a cage, and he taught the rat that when a signal, which was a light, comes on, if the rat runs over and presses a bar, which is what's known on the chart as work, then the rat will get a food pellet, which is reward. So the signal comes on, the light comes on, the rat runs over, presses the bar, that's the work, and then the rat gets reward. And then he measured the amount of dopamine that was released during this process. And as you can see, the dopamine is at its high. It gets released when the light comes on. Not when the rat gets the food pellet, but when the light comes on, and the rat is anticipating that now he's going to go press the bar and then get the food. And you can even see that by the time the rat presses the bar, the dopamine has fallen off. By the time the rat gets the reward, the dopamine is gone. So we know now that what dopamine does is it is released with anticipating a reward. He actually took this further and found that the more, well, I'll phrase this differently. The less predictable it is that you're actually going to get a reward, the more dopamine is released. When things were very predictable, dopamine was released, but when things weren't predictable, when the rat wasn't sure that when he pressed the bar he would get a reward, sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't, that's when the most dopamine was released. So we actually react a lot to unpredictability. Some of you probably own iPhones or maybe used to own an iPhone. This is, I think, an iPhone 3, so this was a couple of years ago. If you might have gone through this, or maybe you know someone who did. Do you remember when the iPhone 3G came out, you couldn't get one? Okay? I mean, it came out, it was announced, but the process to buy one was this long, convoluted thing. I think it was something like you got an email saying it was coming out and that you were now on the list because you were already an iPhone owner. And then, but being on the list didn't, then that meant that you could fill out the form at the website, and then that meant that you got an email, which then that meant that you could actually phone in. I mean, I remember going through all these steps until you finally could buy your iPhone. So you could buy it, but you had no idea when you could buy it and when you would receive it. If you had asked someone, if you just go up to any marketing group at any large corporation and you say, oh, we have a strategy for you, come up with a product, release it, and then make it impossible for anyone to get it. Right? Does that sound like a good strategy? No, it doesn't really sound like a good strategy. And yes, that's the strategy they use. And they're not the only ones that do this. Tesla's been doing this, right? I have a friend who has paid the $1,000. You had to put down a $1,000 deposit to buy the Tesla, which isn't even being built yet. And we have no idea when it's going to be available. But if you pay the $1,000 now, you're on the list, right? So what we're doing when we do things like this is building anticipation, and that can actually make people buy the product. So don't be afraid to make people wait. I think we think, okay, if I'm gonna, the best way to sell something is it's right there, and people go into the store and they take it off the shelf and they put it in the cart and they go through the line and they buy it. But online purchasing of stuff is growing and increasing, partly because you have to wait. It builds anticipation. people actually get excited about that anticipation building, and dopamine is released. Now, you do have to deliver in the end. You do have to give them the product, and the product better be good if they had to wait. But don't be afraid to make them wait. All right, let's take a look at number 3. So I mentioned before that neuron firing what happened unconsciously, and in fact we know that most decisions, and in fact most mental processing of any kind, 95% of all this thinking and stuff and decisions that go on in your brain happen unconsciously, which is kind of weird when you stop and think about it. And this research, I don't know, I get really excited about the research, it really fascinates me. So in this piece of research, the researchers put people in an fMRI machine so they could see their brain activity, had them make decisions and make choices, and the researchers could see in the brain when the decision was made and what the decision was, 7 to 10 seconds before the person was consciously aware that they, A, had made a decision, and B, what they had decided on. So if you ask people, you know, what are you going to buy? Why are you buying it? Why did you buy it? What happens is people will give you an answer, right? They'll make up an answer, and they will believe that that is the true reason, but it's probably not the real reason. So what you have to do is be careful and don't rely on what people say, which is why, of course, we have all these wonderful techniques and measurements for measuring stuff. But we're really new at that. That's still pretty new. We can measure arousal, we can measure emotions now, and we're getting in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. But don't rely necessarily on what people say about why they're buying or not buying. It may not be accurate. Number 4, most buying decisions involve emotions and feelings, not just logic and reasoning, which, since you guys are at this conference, you're probably a group of the people in the world that know this. There's a part of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC. It'll be on the final. No, I'm just kidding, there's no final. And if people have brain damage or injury to this part of their brain, the VMPFC, they can't feel emotions. They just can't. They just don't feel emotions and feelings. But interestingly, they also can't make decisions. So apparently, the ability to make decisions is based partly on this part of the brain that feels emotions. So although people may tell you they're making a decision based on, well, I just, I did the pros and cons, and I looked at the various products, and then I made my decision. They may think that, but that's not necessarily true. Which I think is kind of interesting if we talk about, brand loyalty and what does brand loyalty mean and why is it so important. And here's just one little thought about that. When people feel loyal to a brand, they feel, right? They have a feeling about the brand. They like the brand. They trust the brand, whatever the feeling is. And that feeling, we know, is a precursor to making the decision. So it makes it easier to buy. So one of the reasons brand loyalty is important is just because it has that emotive content that then becomes attached to the brand. So make them feel. If you want them to buy, you have to feel. Now, interestingly, by the way, in terms of brand loyalty, I hope they feel good about your brand. But you know what? You don't have to, in order to stimulate that part of the brain, the VMPFC, it doesn't have to be a positive feeling. It could be a negative feeling. They just have to feel something. So, and we all know, not necessarily perhaps with buying, although maybe, but we know that a lot of decisions, right? People make a lot of decisions when they're angry, when they're upset, right? So it doesn't have to be a positive feeling, although I know you guys aren't going to go out and make people feel angry and upset and mad, right? But it would work. All right, number 5. People make either a goal-directed, value-based buying decision, or they make a buying decision from habit, but not both. There's actually a part of the brain, it's the orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, that is where, when someone is trying to decide, do I want to buy this product, is it worth the price, do I want to buy this one or that one, those are all goal-directed, value-based decisions, and there's parts of the brain that are active in that, and the OFC is one of those. But when the OFC is quiet, if it's not making that value-based, goal-directed decision, when it gets quiet, habit takes over. The parts of the brain that have to do with making habitual decisions, decisions that don't have to do with evaluating, will just take over. Habit is kind of the normal mode we walk around in. We make a lot of our buying decisions based on habit. You go into the grocery store, and especially if you're on the phone with your sister, you go up to the cereal aisle and you just pick out the cereal you always buy, right? Don't even stop and think about it. Your OFC is not active in that case. That's a habit buying decision. So people are going to be doing one or the other. So by the way, this is just a little weird aside. You can turn on the OFC, that goal-directed, value-based part of the brain, with light pulses. Now, this is done so far in a research setting. I don't know of anybody who has, it's an interesting idea, and maybe one day it will happen. I don't know if I think this is a good idea or not. That, as you're walking by the product aisle in the store, they could perhaps emit a light pulse and get that value-oriented, or a poster. You didn't hear this from me. Not a good idea. Don't do it. But I just think it's kind of interesting, that we are entering a phase with neuroscience where we can affect what's going on in the brain without implants. Right? It all can be done from outside. And so that whole thing is a little frightening to me, but it's either frightening or it's an opportunity. I'm not sure which. Okay. So do you know whether your product or service is a goal-directed, value-based decision and is going on in the OFC, or is this decision mainly made by habit? And it's important to know for your target audience which one is going on. If it is a goal-directed, value-based decision that's going to happen in the OFC, then you want to focus on providing information so people can make those comparisons and so on. But if it's a habit decision, you don't want people doing that, okay? If people are buying your product based on habit, do not give them all that information for all the value choices. Because once you do that, you've activated the OFC, and those two things won't happen at the same time. It's either one or the other. They compete. All right, so summarizing then our 5 things. People buy when they feel confident of their decision. Dopamine is released when people anticipate, not when they get the reward. Most decisions, including buying decisions, are made unconsciously. They involve emotions and feelings. People have to feel, or literally they cannot decide. And they are either making that goal-directed or habit, but not both. I have a couple of ideas for you moving forward. If you're interested in more information, I write lots of books, and you might want to check out some of the books. The book on the right, 100 More Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People, has particularly some of this research and others about the latest research on decision making. I have a podcast with one of my colleagues called Human Tech, and we talk about all this kind of stuff, and it's kind of fun. You might want to check that out. I always like to leave people with an inspirational thought, and usually this is something really profound, like from Einstein or something. But this time, buying is weird. That's what I think. Buying is weird. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. That was a great talk, and I wonder if there are any questions out there. We have time for just A few quick ones right here in the center. I see one, and right over here. Go ahead.
What are the implications of what you just told us for introducing a new product into a category in terms of the marketing of it?
Well, of course, it depends on the product and service, whether it's goal-directed or habit. But if you're introducing a new product in, does it compete with the existing products? Okay, so now you better hope that it's goal-directed and value-based, because otherwise you're disrupting the habit. And if you're disrupting a habit and you have to build a new habit, there's a whole chain of things you need to do to make a new habit form. It's actually not hard. One of the most important things is to tie it to an existing habit. So if you can so if it is habit-based, if they've been buying this product and now you're introducing a new one, you want them to buy that one, try tying those two things together, and then they can more easily either add on the new one or switch to the new one.
Okay, we'll go quickly over here.
Yeah, hi. So just a question. I wonder if you can tell us if for highly emotional people or categories in that situation, is there any research that could talk about what is the quality of the stickiness of the decisions that they make in those situations?
You mean, are their decisions more or less sticky if there was a high emotion to
Right,
it?
we all know about buyer's remorse, right? Those are driven by high emotional situations. So I'm wondering if there's any research out there that suggests that because it's highly emotional and I make that decision, I'm going to stick with it, or not.
So the research shows that if it's highly emotional and you publicly commit, that's kind of the big thing that cements the stickiness. And that can be something as simple as, you rate it or write a testimonial, or you post on Facebook, oh, I just bought such and such. I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge public commitment, but just even that little step that I tell others about it. So if it's emotional and there's that little bit of commitment, then it makes it much more sticky.
I think we're going to have to wrap and move on, but I want to thank you, and you're going to be around afterwards.
Yeah, I'll be around afterwards.
To talk and answer more questions.
Yeah.
So
Thank
definitely follow up on the Brain Lady and podcast too. It's great.
Thanks.
So thanks.